On today's show, the bounce back begins for the Cavs as they get a win in Minnesota. But I think the way they won is actually more important than the victory itself. I'll tell you why and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. You're proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode, of course, sponsored by Prize Picks. Now's the perfect time to join. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. The Cleveland Cavaliers get a 124-117 win over the Minnesota Timberwolves on Saturday night in a game that I don't think was as close as the final score would indicate. The Cavs were up by 20 with just under 5 minutes left, and Minnesota went on a run. They kept their starters in the entire time. They tried really hard to make that game closer. Credit to them. That's not something I would have expected them to do on the second night of a back-to-back after they beat the New York Knicks on Friday night, but that is how the end of the game played out, and the Cavs found a way to get a win. And I think it's more important how the Cavs won this game than the fact that they actually won this game. That sounds crazy. I understand that. Let me explain why. So the game was tied at 60 at halftime. I don't think that the Cavs had a ton of energy. I didn't think that the first half was necessarily one that screamed, we're ready to put the OKC game in our rearview mirror. To me, the Cavs looked like a team that was at the end of a week-long road trip. They looked like a team that was ready to get home, and they looked like a team that was maybe looking ahead to the fact that they unfortunately play a 3:30 game on Monday afternoon. And then they came out of the locker room in the second half, and they looked like a championship team. Yes, the Wolves were on the second night of a back-to-back. Yes, I think the Wolves had some fatigued legs. I think those things do matter, but I don't think that's the story here. I think the story is that defensively in that third quarter, the Cavs looked really good, and the Cavs have not looked very good very often defensively in the month of January. It's been, in my opinion, the worst month of defense that they've played. I think it's been worse than November, and I understand the month is not over yet, and there's still games to be played, and we can make a full judgment on the full month of January when the time comes to do so, when the month of January is actually over. But for now, I have not been impressed with what they've done defensively, and then they went and they held, again, Minnesota, not a great offense, and an offense that did play Friday night on the road in New York, but they held them to 19 points. And I thought that was a big step in the right direction. I thought that third quarter was one of the best quarters the Cavs have played in quite some time. And someone pointed out to me on social media that, well, on Tuesday night, they outscored the Pacers by 10 points in a quarter too. They won a quarter against the Pacers 39-29. I thought it was more important the way they won this quarter 29-19 because they held a team to under 20 points in a quarter, which is just not something that has been happening for them very frequently lately. So I thought that was one of the best things that I saw from the Cavs on Saturday night, is that they were able to get stops defensively. And then, of course, after they got stops defensively, what did we see? We saw a Cavalanche. This was the first time that we've had a Cavalanche, in my estimation, and I'm not going to be the gatekeeper of Cavalanches. I can let somebody else determine what is and isn't Cavalanche. But from what I've seen, this was the first real Cavalanche the Cavs have had since January 3rd when they were in Dallas. So it's been a solid couple of weeks, more than 2 weeks, since we had seen a Cavalanche. And for the Cavs to come out and be able to string together a bunch of stops near the end of the third quarter and then put the ball in the basket at the other end of the floor and carried that over into the fourth quarter too. I believe it was with a minute and 42 left in the third quarter. The Cavs were leading the Wolves by 2 points, which was not necessarily great. Now, that was more of an offensive issue than a defensive issue because, like I said, they held Minnesota below 20 points in that quarter. but they were up by 2 points with 1:41 left in the third quarter. 3 minutes and 42 seconds of game time later, the Cavs were up by 20 points, and the game was, for all intents and purposes, was over. And that is the thing that I think when I point to, because that's not going to happen every single night. Like, that is not a feasible thing to expect from a team on an every single night basis. But when the Cavs are rolling, when the Cavs are playing really good basketball, you can see the defensive stops turn into offensive points. And you can see the will to play the game sort of sucked out of the opponents, right? Like, you just see that pulled away from whoever they're playing. It's a very demoralizing thing. And we've seen it a ton of times. But part of the reason why I haven't thought the Cavs have played great basketball in January is because that's been absent. And I'm not saying that needs to happen every night. That's an unrealistic, that's an unfair expectation for the Cavs or any team. But I don't think that it has happened frequently enough over the past couple of weeks for me to say, okay, yeah, well, there are some things going wrong, but at least this is still happening, because it hadn't been happening. Like, they went on a 10-0 run against the Pacers, but then Indiana, and this was on Tuesday in Indiana, but then Indiana immediately responds, right? So it was a really good sign. I think that was the best part of Saturday night, was that the Cavs defended well in the second half. And I'm not going to really talk about some of the garbage time buckets that Minnesota scored. Like, the Cavs were up by 20 with 5 minutes left. And to that point, they had held Minnesota to like 40 points in the second half. And then the Wolves scored 20 points in the final 5 minutes of that game. And that was, whatever. I don't think that's a big deal. But if you put the cutoff at like 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter and the Cavs are up by 20, it looks a lot different than the final score. And that's kind of how I'm viewing this game, because I do think that the Cavs just kind of said, okay, let's get on this plane. Let's get back to Cleveland. But the fact that they were able to defend, that they held Minnesota below 20 points, and I get it, the Wolves, not a great offense, but they held Minnesota below 20 points. They had a Cavalanche at the end of the third, start of the fourth quarter, that the third quarter was a good quarter going into tonight in the month of January. And this was only their 8th game in January, so it's not a huge sample size. But in the 7 games before Saturday night in January, the Cavs had a net rating in third quarters of minus 15.3. They were being outscored by 15.3 points per 100 possessions in the third quarter of January games. That was 26th in the NBA. So to come out of the locker room and beat down a team the way they beat down the Wolves on Saturday night, I thought that was another really good sign for this team. I thought it was something that we needed to see, because I talked on Friday about how I thought the most important thing about the OKC loss on Thursday was, how are the Cavs going to respond to this? How are they going to move on from the OKC loss? Because, I think a lot of the way I view this stuff is obviously what happens on the floor, right? Like, what happened on Saturday night was important for the Cavs. But I also think, especially when covering a team that speaks so much about building habits the right way and building for something greater than just regular season success. So I look at it as, okay, well, how do they respond to certain things? And I think for the most part, they've responded to things really, really well throughout this season. Like the first loss of the season to Boston, where they do, and yeah, that Pelicans team they played the next night was very limited in terms of who's on the floor, but they won a game by almost 30 points that Donovan Mitchell didn't play in, or Darius Garland, did not play in. That was a really good response. How did they respond to the 2 losses, their first back-to-back losses of the season against Atlanta? They beat the Boston Celtics in the very next game. How did they respond to losing to OKC in their worst loss of the season? They won the next game. How did they respond to losing to Indiana, which to that point was their worst loss of the season? They won the next game. As a matter of fact, the thing that I think, oddly enough, they have responded the worst to has been their greatest success. Because you look at the win they have against OKC a couple weeks ago at this point, 10 days ago at this point, I guess. They didn't respond well to that. Like, they won that game. It was an awesome game. I think it was the best game in the NBA this year in terms of competitiveness, intensity, just, shot making, all of that. They came out on top of that. And then they responded by, I think, playing their worst stretch of basketball. Like, I believe that, they're only, what are they, 3-2, 4-2 since that game. And I think that stretch of basketball is worse than when they lost 3 out of 10 games during a stretch of the season when they lost both Atlanta games and the Miami game. I think that stretch that we've seen has been their worst stretch of basketball. Now, is this a big deal? No, it's January. And I think that Saturday night against the Wolves, the way they won this game with defense, with a second half Cavalanche, with a big night from Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, which I'm going to talk about coming up in a second. All of those things lead me to believe that this is not the full response to what happened on Thursday against OKC. I think this was a good start to the response, and I think it's important that they continue to respond by playing well in more than just one game or even really one half, because I don't know that they played all that well in the second half. So I thought that the Cavs started off responding, particularly in that second half, really well. I think Donovan Mitchell mentioned to Serena Winters on the broadcast after the game that the second half was sort of a response to the first half because that wasn't necessarily up to their standards. So I do think that they're on the right track. We'll see what happens moving forward, but I do need to talk about Donovan Mitchell because he was really good. He sensed the moment again. Darius Garland had a huge second half, so we're going to do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Basketball season is heating up. And of course, there's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with Prize Picks. Whether you're a diehard fan or love some friendly competition, Prize Picks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. So here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. You think LeBron, that guy, he's pretty good, going to drop 30 or more points. Maybe you think Trae Young's going to have 10 or more assists. I don't know what you think is going to happen, but you can pick more or less, and then Prize Picks will let you make those predictions and put your money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds. Prize Picks is the thing to use all season. It's fun. It's awesome. It's one of the best things going out there. Plus, with Prize Picks Flex Play, if one of your picks doesn't hit, you can still double your money. Plus, when you do hit, you get your money fast, sometimes as quick as 15 minutes. Pretty quick. It's pretty good for this. It's honestly the best way to keep the game exciting. And now is the perfect time to join. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Subscribe. Tell a friend to subscribe. Be a friend. Tell a friend. Also, Locked On Cavs now does have a newsletter introducing the Locked On Cavs daily newsletter, your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That is lockedondaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Cavs newsletter. Donovan Mitchell, one of the best things about his season. I talked a bunch about his leadership earlier this week. I think sensing the moment is something that we have to talk about with Donovan Mitchell a lot because he has not always been the guy for this team that is needed to put on his superhero cape and carry this team on most nights. That's just not what the Cavs need him to do because the Cavs are really good in a lot of spots. And if Donovan Mitchell is doing a lot of the heavy lifting during November, December, January, February, like that, the Cavs probably aren't going to get to where they want to get to when April, May, and June roll around. So the fact that a lot of the other guys, primarily Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, have been able to do a lot of the heavy lifting alongside Donovan Mitchell has been one of the best parts about this team, right? Well, on Saturday night, I think that it was important for Donovan Mitchell to come out and have a really good game. And he did. He scored 36 points, made 4 threes. It's the first time he's made 4 threes in a game since the calendar flipped to 2025. Now, he took 15 of them, so it wasn't as if he had the most efficient shooting night. But I think the Cavs needed him to step up. I think the Cavs needed him to go out and be a leader through aggressiveness and scoring on Saturday night. And I do think that there are a lot of different ways that he or anybody can be a leader. It's not always about putting the ball in the basket. Sometimes it's about defense. Sometimes it's about playmaking and setting up for others. I think Saturday night, in a way that was very similar to Tuesday night, the Cavs needed Donovan Mitchell to put the ball in the basket. They needed him to be that type of leader. And I do think that there's a common thread here, because I talked in the first segment about some of the down moments the Cavs have had this year, where they've had some losses. And, I think that this might be the first like real adversity, just how bad the OKC loss was on Thursday. But let's go back through their losses. So they lost, that first loss to Boston. They played a bad Pelicans team that didn't have anybody available. I don't know if that's necessarily worth talking about. But then they lose 2 straight to Atlanta. And in the second game, I just kind of thought they missed shots. But they come out, they play Boston on a Sunday, and they start off 15-0, and they could have a 3-game losing streak a week later, 2 weeks later. That's not necessarily a great place to be. Donovan Mitchell has a huge fourth quarter. I think scores 20 points in that fourth quarter. That was leadership through buckets. They lose again to the Pacers Sunday. What does Donovan Mitchell do? He comes out, he has 19 points in the first quarter, 27 points in the first half on Tuesday. That again, leadership through buckets. Thursday, they get the doors blown off by OKC. Comes out as 36 points on Saturday night. That is leadership through buckets. And I think that he knows, I think he does a great job of knowing when it's time for leadership through buckets and when it's time maybe for leadership through other things. And I think that is one of the most impressive parts about his season. And two, I do think a big part of his game on Saturday night was that it wasn't just about scoring. Like, he also had 7 assists. He had 8 rebounds in a game where the Cavs needed help because Evan Mobley wasn't available, did not play in this game because of a calf injury. So the fact that Donovan Mitchell was able to pick up the slack on the rebounding, in that category was a really big deal for this Cavs team, particularly in the second half. I think he had 5 rebounds in the second half, 5 of his 8. And that was after the Cavs got, I don't want to say crushed on the boards in the first half, but they lost the rebounding battle 28-21 in the first half. They won it 26-14 in the second half. And I think Donovan Mitchell was a big reason why that was. He also had 2 offensive rebounds and kept possessions alive. Thought that was really important too. But the fact that this was a very, I thought, complete game for him was a big deal in this spot. 36 points, again, not the most efficient night that he's ever had. But I don't think that mattered. I think the Cavs needed some scoring. I think they needed him to be aggressive. And I think they needed him to really be a bit of a tone setter in this one. And it wasn't necessarily because they needed him to go out and score a bunch of points in the first quarter, which of course he is obviously capable of doing that. But that's not what they needed. They needed him to be a tone setter throughout the night, because in that first quarter, he actually didn't get off to a good start. It was one of his first 7. Only had 3 points. Cavs were outscored by 12 points in the first, or excuse me, never mind. That is the wrong box score I'm looking at. In the first quarter, he was okay. He had 10 points, 3 of 6. Cavs outscored Minnesota by 2 in that quarter, in a quarter where they were outscored by 3 for the whole. And I think they trailed by as many as 11 early on. So it wasn't necessarily great, but they needed Donovan Mitchell to go out, and they needed Donovan Mitchell to be a scoring threat in this game. They needed him to put the ball in the bucket. And then Darius Garland, I thought, had a great second half. I thought he was really, really good after halftime. I thought in the second half, in which the Cavs played, was their better half, no doubt. I thought Darius was the best player on the floor. And that, to me, matters a lot. He scored 21 points in the second half. Thought he really took control. He hit 3 threes. And he has been somebody who I don't think it's fair to call him like an unsung hero. He's getting a lot of all-star buzz. He deserves to be an all-star. He was awesome again on Saturday night. I think that he followed Donovan's lead, but I think that, he also knows when to pick up the slack, and he knows when it's his time to go. Like the second half on Saturday night absolutely was Darius Garland's time to go. He knew when to play make. He knew when to take over. He knew when to take shots. He knew when to do it all. And I think that both of those guys, what makes them special as a backcourt is the being able to sense the moment as well as they do. I think that this was a big game for the Cavs, not because, Minnesota's some rivalry, or not because the Wolves are some great team. I think that they're better than their record is, but they're also just a team that I don't think has a great fit necessarily. And they're a team that I do think needs to make a trade. But this would have been a game that if they lost, I think people would have started pressing the panic button. I think that would have been unfair, but I think that's where things would probably have been. And those two, on a night when Evan Mobley didn't play, like I mentioned. Those two didn't let that happen. And I think that is a very, very important thing. So I think the Cavs got great efforts from both guys in the backcourt. Donovan Mitchell knows when to lead through buckets, and I think Darius Garland knows when it's his time. The second half this year has been his time for the most part. We saw that again. Ty Jerome was awesome in this game, and so was George Niang. We got to give those guys a little bit of love, so we'll do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. George Niang was awesome in this game. Ty Jerome was awesome in this game. Both those guys finished with 15 points. George Niang had 10 rebounds as well. He had a double-double. Ty Jerome, 15 points, 5 of 7 shooting. They were actually both 5 of 7 shooting. Ty Jerome played just under 22 minutes. He played 21 minutes, 44 seconds. He was a plus 28. A plus 28. And the plus-minus stat does not always tell the full story. Sometimes it doesn't tell the story at all. Ty Jerome felt like a plus 28 in this game. Like it felt as if for all 21 minutes and 44 seconds that he was on the floor, things went well for the Cavs. And I know that's not the case. It's not as if Minnesota didn't score throughout that entire time. Like, it wasn't perfect, but it felt real close to it. Like, I thought the impact that Ty Jerome had on this game was really, really big. I think he's starting to, I don't necessarily know that he's at the same place he was in November where he was just stringing together 20-point game after game after game. But I definitely think he's playing better basketball in January than he was during the month of December. Like, I don't think Ty Jerome had a great December, but I think he's having a really, really good January. Sorry. So that plus 28, really, you felt the impact of Ty Jerome. And then George Niang had 15 points, 10 boards, 5 of 7 shooting, hit a few big shots. Like the one layup that he had under the basket, I thought was important. He had a 3-pointer that pushed the Cavs lead out to 17 in the corner at the very end of the shot clock. I thought that was important in the second half on this game. And I think that George is having a better season than people are willing to give him credit for. I think that, offensively, he's going to be a guy that you're going to count on to go out there and hit shots. Like, that's what he's going to do. Is he going to ever blow you away with athleticism? No, of course not. Is he going to go out there and are you going to want to see him take guys off the dribble all the time to the rack? Probably not. But he's shooting 38% from 3. He's been a good asset to this team. I think that he unfairly gets criticized because people expect him to be something that he's not, something that he's never been. He's been a good shooter for this Cavs team. He's been really great in this locker room, and I know that people don't see that, maybe don't necessarily understand that to the extent that it is true. I think that Kenny Atkinson, after the game, was watching this press conference on TV, and Kenny called him one of the team's best defenders. Like he said, other than Jarrett Allen on Saturday night, George Niang was the best defender. And I don't know necessarily if I agree with that, but I also don't think he's some bum defensively either. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that do think that. I don't see things that way with him. I think he provides value to this team. And I think you saw that on Saturday night. Now, it's a little easier to look at his box score from Saturday and be like, yeah, of course he provided value. He scored 15 points. He had 10 rebounds. Right. I get that. But I think day in and day out, George Niang provides value to this team, to this organization, to that locker room that people don't necessarily give him credit for. I understand why, because he maybe hasn't shot the basketball quite as well as everyone expected him to in Cleveland. Like last year, he did not have a great year. This year, I think he's been solid. I think he's been a good basketball player for this team this year. I think he deserves a little bit more credit than what he's been given. And I thought we saw him play probably his best game so far this season in a place where the Cavs needed it. You know, you talk about leadership, not saying George Niang like is the captain of this team or anything, but I do think that it's not a coincidence that you see the stat floating around that nobody has a better record in the NBA in the last decade than George Niang. I don't think that's a coincidence. I also don't think it's a coincidence that when he has left situations, things have turned for the worse in those situations. You look at Utah. I believe he left the year before Donovan Mitchell was traded to Cleveland. Didn't go well that last year. It was the vibes in Utah were not great. He leaves Philly to come to Cleveland. The vibes in Philly have not been good. I'm not saying George is all of that, but I think he's part of that. And I think he's part of the reason why the vibes in Cleveland are as good as they are. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today, for making it your first listen every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs. Quick announcement. Starting on Sunday night, so tonight, I'm going to be hosting Locked On NBA, the national show, Locked On NBA Game Night. Going to be talking all the games. So if you care about what I have to say about games that aren't the Cavs, make sure you're subscribed there. Just search Locked On NBA anywhere you get your podcasts. Also, it will be on YouTube. Super excited to get to do this for this opportunity. I think it's going to be really cool. I will, of course, be back tomorrow with another Locked On Cavs. We're going to talk about first half of the season. We are here. The Cavs have played 41 games. They're on pace for 70 wins. We're going to talk about that. We are going to talk about Cam Johnson. I know the report that came out. I know the Cavs do have interest. I don't know that Cam Johnson is going to be in Cleveland because I don't know that they have enough to get him. So we will dive deeper into that situation as well coming up on Monday. But thank you again for making this your first listen today and every single day. And I will talk to you on Monday.